The gunshot echoed across the canyon just as Tanner Yates rounded the bend in the dusty trail, his chestnut mare stumbling slightly over loose rocks before regaining her footing beneath the scorching Colorado sun of July 1883. He had been tracking the stolen wagon for 3 days now, ever since old Mr. Patterson reported it missing from outside the general store in Manassas. And what Tanner found when he finally caught up to the abandoned vehicle made his blood run cold in a way no amount of desert heat could remedy. The wagon sat tilted against an outcropping of red rock, one wheel broken clean off, surrounded by the scattered belongings someone had clearly rifled through and discarded as worthless. But it was not the ransacked supplies that caught his attention. It was the iron cage in the back, sized like something meant for transporting dangerous animals, and inside that cage was a woman. She was curled against the bars, her dark hair matted with dust and sweat, her dress torn and filthy. When she heard his boots hit the ground, her head snapped up, and Tanner saw eyes the color of storm clouds staring at him with a mixture of terror and desperate hope that nearly broke something inside his chest. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracked and dry. "Please help me." Tanner did not waste time with questions. He drew his revolver, aimed carefully at the heavy padlock securing the cage door, and fired. The lock shattered, metal pieces scattering across the wagon bed. He holstered his weapon and wrenched the cage door open, the hinges screaming in protest. The woman tried to stand, but her legs gave out immediately. Tanner caught her before she hit the floor of the wagon, gathering her into his arms as gently as he could manage. She weighed almost nothing, and up close he could see the bruises on her arms, the cracked lips, the hollow look of someone who had not eaten or had water in far too long. "I have got you," he said quietly. "You are safe now." She made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob, her fingers clutching at his shirt as he carried her toward his horse. The mare shifted nervously at the unfamiliar burden, but Tanner made soothing sounds until the animal settled. Getting them both mounted took some maneuvering, but soon he had the woman seated in front of him, her body slumped against his chest as he turned the horse back toward Manassas. The ride took hours, and during that time, Tanner learned her name was Katherine Ashford, that she had been traveling with a small wagon train from Kansas when raiders attacked in the night, that they had killed the other families and taken her for reasons she did not yet want to speak about. She drifted in and out of consciousness as they rode, and each time she stirred, Tanner found himself checking to make sure she was still breathing, still alive. By the time they reached the outskirts of Manassas, the sun was setting in brilliant streaks of orange and gold across the mountain peaks. The small town consisted of a single main street lined with wooden buildings, a church at one end and a saloon at the other, with houses scattered in the spaces between. Tanner rode straight past the doctor's office, past the curious stares of townspeople emerging for their evening routines, and did not stop until he reached his own small ranch at the edge of town. The house was modest, a 2-room cabin with a covered porch and a barn out back where he kept his 2 horses and a milk cow. Tanner dismounted carefully, lifting Katherine down and carrying her inside. He laid her on his own bed, the only bed in the house, and hurried to light the oil lamps and stoke the fire in the small stove. Water. She needed water first. He filled a tin cup from the bucket by the door and returned to her side, sliding one arm beneath her shoulders to prop her up. "Katherine," he said gently, "can you drink this?" Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then locking onto his face. She nodded weakly, and he brought the cup to her lips. She drank greedily at first, choking slightly, and he pulled the cup back. "Slow," he cautioned. "Small sips." She obeyed, and when the cup was empty she sagged back against the pillows with a shuddering breath. "Thank you," she whispered. "I thought I was going to die out there." "How long were you in that cage?" "4 days, I think. Maybe 5, I lost count." Tanner felt rage building in his chest, hot and fierce. What kind of monsters would leave a woman caged like an animal in the middle of the desert? But he pushed the anger down, focusing instead on what she needed now. "I am going to get the doctor," he said, standing. Her hand shot out, grabbing his wrist with surprising strength. "Do not leave me." The fear in her voice made him pause. He looked down at her dirt-streaked face, at the desperation in those gray eyes, and he felt something shift inside him, something he could not quite name. "All right," he said, sitting back down on the edge of the bed. "I will stay, but you need medical attention." "Tomorrow," she said. "Just let me rest tonight, please." He should have argued. She clearly needed more care than he could provide. But the way she held onto his wrist, the trembling in her fingers, told him that what she needed most right now was to feel safe. And for some reason she felt safe with him. "Tomorrow," he agreed. He heated up some beef broth left over from his own simple dinner, managing to get her to eat a few spoonfuls before exhaustion claimed her, and she fell into a deep sleep. Tanner sat in the wooden chair beside the bed, watching her chest rise and fall, and wondered what twist of fate had led him to that canyon at exactly the right moment. When dawn broke through the single window, painting the room in pale gold light, Katherine was still sleeping. Tanner had dozed fitfully in the chair, his body protesting the uncomfortable position, but he had not wanted to leave her alone. He stood quietly, stretching the kinks from his back, and went outside to tend to the animals. The morning air was already warming up, promising another scorching day. He fed the horses and the cow, collected eggs from the small chicken coop, and filled buckets with fresh water from the well. By the time he returned to the house, Katherine was awake, sitting up in bed and looking around the sparse room with wide eyes. "Good morning," Tanner said, setting the water bucket down. "How are you feeling?" "Like I was run over by a stampede," she admitted, but there was a hint of wry humor in her voice that had not been there the night before. "But better than yesterday. I will go fetch Doc Morrison after breakfast. He needs to look at those bruises." Katherine glanced down at her arms, as if noticing the purple and yellow marks for the first time. "They look worse than they feel." That is what everyone says right before they keel over from internal bleeding. Despite everything, she almost laughed. "You are very persistent." "So I have been told." He cooked eggs and bacon over the stove, and they ate together in companionable silence. Tanner caught her watching him several times, her expression unreadable, but she did not offer any explanation, and he did not ask for one. After breakfast, he rode into town and returned with Doc Morrison, a graying man in his 60s who had seen just about everything the frontier could throw at a person. The doctor examined Katherine thoroughly while Tanner waited outside, pacing the length of the porch and trying not to think about what else those raiders might have done to her. When Doc Morrison finally emerged, his expression was grave but not alarmed. "She is dehydrated and malnourished, but nothing that rest and proper food will not fix. The bruises are superficial. She was very lucky." "Lucky," Tanner repeated flatly. "Luckier than most who fall into the hands of men like that," the doctor said quietly. "And lucky that you found her when you did. Another day or two in that heat, and we would be having a very different conversation." After the doctor left, Tanner returned inside to find Katherine sitting by the window, staring out at the mountains in the distance. She had washed her face and hands with the water he had left for her, and without the layers of dust and grime, he could see that she was younger than he had first thought, probably no more than 22 or 23. She had high cheekbones and a determined set to her jaw that spoke of inner strength. "The doctor says you need to rest and eat," Tanner said. I heard. She turned to look at him. You saved my life. Anyone would have done the same. No, she said firmly, not anyone. Most men would have ridden past that canyon without even looking. You did not have to track that wagon. You did not have to break open the cage. You did not have to bring me here and give up your bed and spend the night in a chair watching over me. So please, let me say thank you properly. Thank you, Tanner Yates. He had told her his name during the ride back, during one of her brief moments of consciousness, but hearing her say it now, with such sincerity, made his chest tighten. You are welcome, Katherine Ashford. The days that followed fell into a gentle rhythm. Katherine was weak at first, sleeping most of the time, but gradually her strength returned. Tanner continued his work around the ranch, tending to the animals and fixing the broken fence posts he had been meaning to get to for weeks, but he always made sure she had everything she needed. He cooked meals, simple fare of beans and bacon and cornbread, and was pleased to see her eating more each day. On the fourth morning after he had found her, Tanner woke to the smell of coffee brewing. He had been sleeping on a bedroll on the floor, insisting that Katherine keep the bed, and for a moment he thought he was dreaming. But no, there she was, standing at the stove in the dress he had borrowed from Mrs. Patterson in town, her dark hair pulled back in a simple braid, pouring coffee into 2 cups. I figured it was time I started pulling my weight around here, she said when she noticed him staring. You should be resting. I have been resting for 4 days. Any more resting and I will go mad. She handed him a cup, and he took it automatically, still trying to process the sight of her moving around his kitchen like she belonged there. Besides, I need to start figuring out what comes next. That was the question Tanner had been avoiding thinking about. What did come next? Katherine had no family that she had mentioned, no money, no possessions beyond the borrowed dress she wore. The logical answer would be to help her get to the nearest city where she might find work, or perhaps contact any distant relatives who could take her in. But the thought of her leaving made something twist uncomfortably in his gut. You do not have to figure it all out today, he said carefully. I know. But I cannot stay here forever, taking advantage of your kindness. You are not taking advantage. She met his eyes, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Then Katherine looked away, a faint flush coloring her cheeks. I should make breakfast. Do you like eggs? I like eggs fine. She moved around the kitchen with surprising familiarity, finding the skillet and the lard and the basket of eggs without asking where anything was kept. Tanner sat at the small table, drinking his coffee and watching her cook, and tried to remember the last time his house had felt this alive. It had been 3 years since Martha died, 3 years since he had buried his wife and unborn child and locked away everything inside himself that knew how to feel. He had kept to himself since then, working the ranch, helping out in town when needed, but never letting anyone get close. It was safer that way. Lonelier, but safer. Katherine was cracking that shell whether she meant to or not. After breakfast, Tanner rode into town to check in with Sheriff Davis and report what he had found. The sheriff was a stocky man with a thick mustache and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Raiders took her, you say? Davis leaned back in his chair, boots propped on his desk. That is what she told me. Attacked a wagon train out of Kansas about a week ago, and she is the only survivor as far as I know. The sheriff was quiet for a moment, studying Tanner's face. You planning on keeping her out at your place? She has nowhere else to go. That is not what I asked. Tanner bristled. I am making sure she is safe and recovered. Once she is ready, she can decide what she wants to do next. People are going to talk, Tanner. Young woman living alone with a single man. People can talk all they want. I know my intentions are honorable. I do not doubt that, but you might want to consider how it looks for her. Reputation matters, especially for a woman trying to start over. Tanner knew the sheriff was right, but the idea of sending Katherine away just to satisfy town gossip made his jaw clench. "I will handle it." When he returned home, Katherine had swept the floors and washed the breakfast dishes and was sitting on the porch steps with her face turned up to the sun. She looked so peaceful that he almost hated to disturb her, but she heard his horse and opened her eyes, smiling when she saw him. "How was town?" "Fine. Talked to the sheriff about the raiders." The smile faded from her face. "What did he say?" "He is going to send word to the other towns, see if anyone has information. But Katherine, there is something else." He dismounted and walked over to sit beside her on the steps, leaving a respectful distance between them. "The sheriff pointed out that you living here with me, unmarried, is going to cause talk. I had not thought about it, but he is right. It could damage your reputation." Katherine was quiet for a long moment, her fingers plucking at the fabric of her skirt. "I do not want to cause problems for you." "That is not what I am worried about." "Then what are you worried about?" "You. Your future. If word gets around that you have been living here with me, it could make things difficult when you try to find work or, well, anything else. So what do you suggest?" Tanner had been thinking about this the whole ride back from town, turning it over in his mind, and he still was not sure it was the right answer. But it was the only answer he could come up with that did not involve sending her away. "Mrs. Patterson runs a boarding house in town. She has a room available. You could stay there, work for your keep maybe, until you figure out your next steps." Katherine turned to look at him, her gray eyes searching his face. "Is that what you want? For me to go to town?" "No," he thought. "What I want is for you to stay here in my house, filling it with life the way you have for the past 4 days." But he could not say that. He barely understood it himself. "I want what is best for you," he said instead. "That is not an answer." "Katherine." "I will go if you want me to," she said quietly. "But I need you to be honest with me. Is this about my reputation, or is it about something else? Are you uncomfortable having me here?" "No." The word came out more forcefully than he intended. "That is not it at all." "Then what?" He did not have an answer that made sense, so he said nothing. They sat in silence, the hot afternoon sun beating down on them until Katherine finally stood. "I will start packing my things." "Katherine, wait." She paused at the door, looking back at him. "Stay," he said. "At least for another week. Make sure you are fully recovered before making any decisions. And the town gossip, let them gossip. I have dealt with worse." A slow smile spread across her face, transforming her features from pretty to genuinely beautiful. "All right, 1 more week." But 1 week turned into 2, and 2 into 3, and somehow Katherine never did make it to Mrs. Patterson's boarding house. She found ways to make herself useful, cooking and cleaning and tending the small vegetable garden behind the house. Tanner found himself looking forward to coming back from his work each day, knowing she would be there with a hot meal and easy conversation. They learned about each other in small increments. Katherine told him about growing up in Kansas, the daughter of a shopkeeper and a schoolteacher, both of whom had died in a cholera outbreak 2 years prior. She had been trying to reach California, hoping to find work as a teacher herself, when the raiders attacked. Tanner told her about his own childhood on a ranch in Texas, about following the cattle drives north as a young man, about meeting Martha at a church social in Denver, and settling down in Manassas to start their own small ranch. He told her about the fever that took Martha and the baby, about the darkness that followed, and Katherine listened without judgment or pity, just quiet understanding. "I am sorry you lost them," she said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. "But I think they would be glad you are still living, still caring for people." "I have not cared for anyone in a long time. You care for me. He could not argue with that. Somewhere along the way, without him noticing exactly when or how, Katherine Ashford had become important to him in a way that both thrilled and terrified him. 1 month after Tanner found Katherine in that cage, the first real trouble arrived. Tanner was in the barn repairing a saddle when he heard horses approaching fast. He grabbed his rifle and stepped outside to find 3 rough-looking men reining up in front of his house. Their clothes were dusty from hard riding, their faces unshaven, and all 3 wore their guns low on their hips in the manner of men who use them often. "Help you gentlemen," Tanner called out, keeping his rifle pointed at the ground but ready to raise it if needed. The leader, a tall man with a scar running down his left cheek, leaned forward in his saddle. "We are looking for something that belongs to us. A woman, dark hair, gray eyes. Heard tell a cowboy brought someone matching that description to town about a month back." Every muscle in Tanner's body went tense. "I do not know what you are talking about." "Now, I think you do," the scarred man gestured to his companions. "We tracked our property to a wagon in the canyon, found the cage empty, lock shot clean off. You would not know anything about that, would you?" "That woman was not your property. No person is property. We paid good money for her, $300 to a man who said he could deliver. Then she disappeared before we could collect. So you see, that makes her ours by right of purchase." Tanner raised the rifle, aiming it squarely at the scarred man's chest. "Get off my land." The 3 men exchanged glances, and Tanner saw their hands moving toward their weapons. This was about to get very bad very quickly. But before anyone could draw, the front door of the house opened and Katherine stepped out onto the porch. "No," Tanner said sharply. "Get back inside." But Katherine did not move. She stood straight and tall, her chin lifted in defiance, staring down the 3 men who had presumably paid to have her kidnapped. "I am not going anywhere with you," she said, her voice steady despite the fear Tanner could see in her eyes. "I am not property. I never was." The scarred man laughed, an ugly sound. "You think you got a choice, sweetheart. You think this cowboy is going to protect you. We will burn this place to the ground and drag you out of the ashes if we have to." "You will have to shoot me first," Tanner said quietly. "That can be arranged." The world slowed down. Tanner saw the scarred man's hand move toward his gun. Tanner's finger tightened on the trigger. But before either of them could fire, a new voice rang out across the yard. "That is enough." Sheriff Davis rode into view from behind the barn, his own rifle trained on the 3 strangers. Behind him came 4 more men from town, all armed, all looking ready for a fight. "Sheriff," the scarred man said, his hand freezing halfway to his weapon, "this is a private matter." "Nothing private about threatening folks in my jurisdiction. Now, you have got about 10 seconds to turn those horses around and ride out of here before I throw all 3 of you in jail. We have legal papers. I do not care if you have got a letter from President Arthur himself. That woman is under my protection now, and you are trespassing on private property with intent to harm. So unless you want to test how fast my men can shoot, I suggest you move along." For a tense moment, nobody moved. Then the scarred man spat in the dust and wheeled his horse around. "This is not over." "Yes," Tanner said, still holding his rifle steady. "It is." The 3 men rode off, disappearing down the trail in a cloud of dust. Only when they were completely out of sight did Tanner lower his weapon. His hands were shaking, he realized. Not from fear, but from the raw fury that had coursed through him at the thought of those men taking Katherine. Sheriff Davis dismounted and walked over, his expression grim. "I heard in town that some strangers were asking questions about a woman matching Katherine's description. Figured I should ride out and check on things." "Thank you," Tanner said. "I appreciate it. They might come back. Men like that do not give up easy when they think someone owes them something. Let them come. They will find a different welcome next time. The sheriff glanced at Katherine, who still stood on the porch looking pale but composed. "Miss Ashford, I think it would be wise if you stayed close to town for a while. Safety in numbers and all that." "She is safe here," Tanner said before Katherine could respond. "Tanner, be reasonable. You cannot watch her every second of every day." "Actually, Sheriff, I can." Tanner turned to look at Katherine, and the words came out before he could stop them, before he could second-guess or talk himself out of it. "If she agrees to marry me." The silence that followed was absolute. Sheriff Davis stared at him. The men from town stared at him. Katherine stared at him with an expression he could not read. "Well," the sheriff finally said, "that is one solution." Tanner barely heard him. He was looking at Katherine, watching her face, trying to understand what she was thinking. He had not planned to propose, had not even allowed himself to fully acknowledge what he felt for her, but now that the words were out there, he realized they were true. He wanted to marry her. He wanted her to stay, not just for another week or month, but forever. "Katherine," he said quietly, "can I talk to you inside for a minute?" She nodded wordlessly and led the way into the house. Tanner followed, closing the door behind them and leaving the sheriff and his men waiting outside. "I am sorry," he said immediately. "I should not have sprung that on you in front of everyone. I was not thinking." "Do you mean it?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Mean what? Do you want to marry me, or were you just trying to find a way to keep me safe?" It was a fair question, and she deserved an honest answer. Tanner took a deep breath, searching for the right words. "When I found you in that cage, all I thought about was getting you to safety. And then, when I brought you here, I told myself I was just helping someone in need. But Katherine, somewhere along the way, you became more than that. I look forward to seeing you every morning. I think about you when I am working. I cannot imagine this house without you in it anymore. So yes, part of this is about keeping you safe. But the bigger part is that I have fallen in love with you, and I do not want you to leave." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling. "I fell in love with you too. I think I started falling that first day when you shot the lock off the cage and carried me like I was something precious. I have been too afraid to say anything because I thought you were still in love with Martha." "I will always love Martha," Tanner said gently. "She was my first love, and losing her nearly destroyed me. But that does not mean I cannot love again. It does not mean I cannot love you." Katherine crossed the small room and took his hands in hers. "Then yes, I will marry you." The relief that flooded through him was almost painful in its intensity. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, and for the first time in 3 years, Tanner Yates allowed himself to believe that he might actually be happy again. They were married 3 days later in the small church at the end of Main Street, with Sheriff Davis standing as witness and half the town crammed into the pews. Katherine wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Patterson had helped her sew, and Tanner wore his best shirt and vest, his dark hair freshly cut, and his boots polished to a shine. Reverend Mills performed the ceremony with solemn dignity, speaking about love and commitment and the sacred bond of marriage. When it came time for Tanner to say his vows, he looked into Katherine's eyes and spoke from the heart. "I vow to protect you, to care for you, to stand beside you through whatever comes. I vow to listen when you speak, to value your thoughts and feelings, to build a life with you based on trust and respect. And I vow to love you, Katherine Ashford, for all the days of my life." Katherine's own vows were equally simple and heartfelt. "I vow to be your partner, your friend, your companion in all things. I vow to support your dreams, to share your burdens, to make a home filled with love and laughter. And I vow to love you, Tanner Yates, for as long as I draw breath." When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Tanner kissed her gently, aware of all the eyes watching but caring only about the woman in his arms. The congregation erupted in applause and cheers, and for a moment, all the darkness and tragedy and pain of the past few years faded away, replaced by pure joy. The reception was held at the boarding house, with Mrs. Patterson organizing a feast of roasted chicken and vegetables, and 3 different kinds of pie. The townspeople brought gifts, practical things like blankets and cooking pots, and a beautiful quilt that the church ladies had worked on together. Tanner and Katherine accepted each gift with gratitude, overwhelmed by the kindness of neighbors who had barely known Katherine existed a month ago. As the sun set and the celebration wound down, Tanner and Katherine rode back to the ranch together, Katherine seated in front of him on the horse the same way she had been that first day. But everything was different now. Now she was his wife. Now this was her home too. That night, they made love for the first time in the bed they would share for the rest of their lives. Tanner was gentle with her, mindful of everything she had been through, but Katherine met him with passion and tenderness that took his breath away. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, and Tanner marveled at how completely his life had changed in just a few short weeks. "Are you happy?" Katherine asked, her head resting on his chest. "Happier than I have been in a very long time," he said honestly. "Are you?" "Yes, but Tanner, I need to tell you something." He tensed slightly, worried by her serious tone. "What is it?" "Those men who came looking for me. I do not think they are going to give up just because we got married." "Let them come. They cannot touch you now. You do not know what kind of people they are. They have money and connections. They could make trouble for us, for the whole town. Then we will deal with it together. You are not alone anymore, Katherine. Whatever comes, we face it as a team." She tilted her head up to kiss him, and he could taste the salt of tears on her lips. "I do not deserve you. You deserve everything good in this world, and I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know that." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, and for the first time since that terrible day 3 years ago, Tanner slept without nightmares. The trouble Katherine had predicted arrived 2 weeks later. Tanner was checking the fence line on the far edge of his property when he saw smoke rising from the direction of town. His heart lurched with fear, and he spurred his horse into a gallop, racing back toward Manassas. The general store was on fire, flames licking up the wooden walls and black smoke pouring into the sky. Half the town was already there with buckets, forming a chain from the well, desperately trying to save the building before the fire spread to the structures nearby. Tanner threw himself into the effort, grabbing a bucket and taking his place in the line. The heat was intense, the smoke choking, but slowly they managed to get the flames under control. By the time the fire was finally out, the general store was a blackened shell. The roof collapsed, and most of the merchandise destroyed. Mr. Patterson stood staring at the ruins of his livelihood, his face gray with shock. Sheriff Davis put a hand on his shoulder, speaking quietly, and then both men turned to look at Tanner. "What happened?" Tanner asked as he approached. "Someone said it," the sheriff said grimly. "Patterson saw 3 men riding away right after the fire started. Men matching the description of those who came to your place." Rage burned hotter than the fire in Tanner's chest. "They did this because of Katherine. They are trying to punish the town for protecting her. We do not know that for certain." "Yes, we do. And it is going to get worse unless we stop them." Sheriff Davis nodded slowly. "I have sent word to the marshal in Denver, but it will be days before he can get here. In the meantime, we need to keep watch. If those men are still in the area, they might try something else." That night, Tanner sat Katherine down and told her what had happened. She went pale as she listened, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "This is my fault," she whispered. "Mr. Patterson lost everything because of me. This is not your fault. This is the fault of evil men who think they can do whatever they want. You did not ask to be kidnapped. You did not ask to be sold like cattle. None of this is on you. But people are getting hurt because I am here. Katherine, listen to me." He took her hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "If you leave, if you run, they win. Is that what you want? I want the people of this town to be safe. Then we stand and fight. We show those men that Manasseh does not back down from bullies." She searched his face for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, we stand and fight. But Tanner, promise me something, anything. Promise me you will not do anything foolish. Promise me you will not get yourself killed trying to protect me." He could not promise that, not honestly, but he said, "I promise I will be careful." It was not enough to ease the worry in her eyes, but it was all he could offer. The next few days were tense. The men of Manasseh organized patrols, taking turns watching the town and the surrounding ranches. Tanner made sure Katherine stayed close to the house, and he kept his rifle loaded and within reach at all times. The attack came on the fourth night. Tanner woke to the sound of breaking glass and found 3 men trying to set fire to his barn. He grabbed his rifle and fired a warning shot into the air, shouting for Katherine to stay inside. The men scattered, but one of them returned fire, the bullet slamming into the door frame inches from Tanner's head. He dove for cover, his heart pounding, and fired back. He heard a cry of pain and saw one of the figures go down. Then more gunshots rang out from the direction of town. The patrol had heard the commotion and was coming. The remaining attackers fled into the darkness, leaving their wounded companion behind. Sheriff Davis and his men arrived minutes later, guns drawn and ready for a fight. They found the wounded man lying in the dirt, clutching his shoulder where Tanner's bullet had caught him. It was not the scarred leader, but one of the others who had come to the ranch that first day. "Get him to the doctor," the sheriff ordered. "And then I want him locked up. Maybe he will be willing to talk in exchange for leniency." Tanner barely heard him. He was already running back to the house, desperate to make sure Katherine was all right. He found her standing just inside the door, his old revolver clutched in her shaking hands. "I heard shooting," she said. "I thought they had killed you." He pulled her into his arms, the rifle clattering to the floor. "I am all right. We are both all right." She clung to him, and he felt her tears soaking into his shirt. "This has to end, Tanner. I cannot live like this, always waiting for the next attack. It will end. I promise you it will end." The wounded man did talk. Faced with a charge of attempted murder and arson, he gave up the names of his companions and the location of their camp in the mountains west of town. The scarred leader was named Cyrus Brock, a former soldier turned outlaw who ran a criminal enterprise that included kidnapping women and selling them to brothels and private buyers across the frontier. Katherine had been his most expensive acquisition, purchased from the raiders who killed her wagon train, intended for a wealthy rancher in Wyoming who had specific tastes. When she disappeared, Brock had taken it personally, seeing it as a challenge to his authority and a threat to his reputation. The marshal arrived from Denver 3 days later with a full posse. Sheriff Davis led them to Brock's camp, and when the smoke cleared, 2 of Brock's men were dead and Brock himself was in chains, along with 4 others. The operation was dismantled, and the women who had been held captive were freed and given safe passage to wherever they wanted to go. Katherine wept when she heard the news, not tears of sadness but of relief so profound it shook her entire body. Tanner held her as she cried, stroking her hair and murmuring reassurances that it was truly over, they were truly safe. The town of Manassas began to heal. Mr. Patterson rebuilt his store with help from neighbors, and within 2 months it was open for business again, better than before. The ranchers who had lost livestock or property to Brock's attacks were compensated from the sale of the outlaws' horses and equipment. And slowly, life returned to normal. Tanner and Katherine settled into their life as husband and wife. They worked the ranch together, Katherine proving to be a quick learner when it came to tending animals and managing the daily chores. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and watch the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold, and Tanner would marvel at how completely she had become part of his world. That winter was harsh, with heavy snows that kept them housebound for days at a time. But Tanner did not mind. The forced closeness only deepened their connection, and they spent long nights talking by the fire, sharing stories and dreams and plans for the future. It was during one of those snowbound nights in January that Katherine told him she was pregnant. Tanner stared at her, the words not quite registering at first. Pregnant? Yes. She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. The baby should come in late summer if my calculations are right. He felt like someone had knocked the wind out of him. A baby. Their baby. After everything that had happened, after all the loss and pain, life was giving him another chance. "Are you happy?" Katherine asked, watching his face anxiously. Happy did not even begin to cover it. He pulled her into his lap, kissing her with all the love and joy and gratitude that was overflowing from his heart. "I am more than happy. I am blessed." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Katherine suffered from terrible sickness in the first few months. Tanner fussed over her constantly, bringing her dry crackers and ginger tea, rubbing her feet when they swelled, reading to her from the old books she had brought from town when she could not sleep. As her belly grew, so did Tanner's protective instincts. He hired a young man from town named Billy to help with the heavier ranch work, freeing himself up to stay closer to the house. He drove Katherine to distraction with his constant hovering, but she endured it with good humor, understanding that his fear of losing another wife and child was very real. In August, when the first pain started, Tanner rode into town to fetch Doc Morrison and Mrs. Patterson, who had delivered half the babies in Manassas. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next afternoon. Tanner paced outside the bedroom door, listening to Katherine's cries of pain and feeling utterly helpless. Finally, just as the sun was beginning to set on the second day, he heard a new sound. A baby's cry, strong and lusty. Mrs. Patterson opened the door, her face tired but smiling. "You have a son," she said. "A healthy, beautiful boy." Tanner rushed into the room. Katherine lay propped against the pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blue blanket. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "Meet your son," she whispered. Tanner sat on the edge of the bed, his hands trembling as he reached out to touch the baby's soft head. The infant had a shock of dark hair and eyes that were still the unfocused blue of all newborns. He was perfect. "What should we name him?" Katherine asked. Tanner had thought about this, had turned it over in his mind during the long months of waiting. "I would like to name him Thomas after your father, if that is all right with you." More tears spilled down Katherine's cheeks. "That is perfect." They named him Thomas Matthew Yates, and from the moment he came into the world, he had his parents wrapped around his tiny fingers. Tanner proved to be a doting father, getting up in the night to walk the floor with Thomas when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint, making silly faces to coax out the baby's first smiles. Katherine recovered quickly from the birth, her strength returning as she settled into motherhood. The house was filled with the sounds of a baby's laughter and cries, and Tanner could not remember ever being this happy. Thomas grew into a sturdy toddler with his mother's gray eyes and his father's stubborn chin. He learned to walk by pulling himself up on the furniture, taking his first wobbly steps while Tanner and Katherine cheered him on. He spoke his first word at 10 months, "Mama," which made Katherine cry happy tears. When Thomas was 2 years old, Katherine discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and in the spring of 1887, she gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah Elizabeth. Sarah was tiny and delicate where Thomas had been big and robust, with blonde hair that neither parent could account for, until Katherine remembered her own mother had been fair as a child. Their family was complete. 2 healthy children, a thriving ranch, a marriage built on love and mutual respect. Tanner sometimes thought back to that day in the canyon, finding Katherine locked in a cage, and marveled at the journey that had brought them here. The years passed in a blur of growth and change. Thomas grew tall and strong, learning to ride almost before he could walk properly, following his father around the ranch and imitating everything Tanner did. Sarah was quieter, more thoughtful, with a love of books, and learning that reminded Tanner of Katherine. When Thomas was 7 and Sarah was 5, Katherine started a small school in their home, teaching not just her own children but also the children of neighboring ranchers who lived too far from town to attend the regular schoolhouse. She proved to be a gifted teacher, patient and creative, and the children adored her. Tanner expanded the ranch gradually over the years, buying more land and more cattle, hiring additional help during the busy seasons. The work was hard but satisfying, and he took pride in building something substantial to leave for his children. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Tanner took Katherine on a trip to Denver, leaving the children in the capable hands of Mrs. Patterson. They stayed in a real hotel, ate in fancy restaurants, and attended a theater performance, something neither of them had ever done before. Lying in bed in their hotel room that night, Katherine turned to him with a soft smile. "Do you ever think about that day, when you found me?" "All the time," Tanner admitted. "I think about how close I came to riding right past that canyon, how different everything would be if I had. I think about it too. I think about how lucky I was that it was you who found me. Not just because you saved my life, but because you gave me a life worth living. You did the same for me. I was just going through the motions before you came along. You reminded me how to live again, how to feel again." She kissed him, slow and sweet. "I love you, Tanner Yates." "I love you too, Katherine Yates." They made love that night with the same passion and tenderness they had shared since the beginning, and Tanner felt grateful beyond words for the woman who had become his entire world. More years passed. Thomas grew into a responsible young man who took his duties on the ranch seriously. At 19, he married Emma Carson, the daughter of a rancher from the next county over, and Tanner gained not just a daughter-in-law but a trusted partner in running the ever-expanding ranch. Sarah pursued her education, studying to become a teacher like her mother. At 21, she accepted a position at a school in Colorado Springs, breaking her parents' hearts a little with her departure, but making them immensely proud of the independent, intelligent woman she had become. Tanner and Katherine became grandparents when Thomas and Emma welcomed their first child, a son they named Robert. Holding his grandson for the first time, Tanner felt the circle of life completing itself in a way that was both humbling and profoundly moving. "We have been so blessed," Katherine said that evening as they sat on their porch, the same porch where they had spent countless evenings over the past 2 decades. Her hair was streaked with silver now, and there were lines around her eyes from years of smiling, but to Tanner she was just as beautiful as she had been at 22. "That we have," he agreed, taking her hand. His own hair had gone gray at the temples, and his joints ached more than they used to, but he still felt strong, still felt capable of handling whatever life threw at him. "You have any regrets?" Katherine asked. Tanner thought about it carefully. There were things he wished had been different, certainly. He wished Martha and their baby had not died. He wished Katherine had not suffered through that terrible ordeal with the raiders. He wished he could have spared her the fear and pain of those first few months in Manasseh. But regrets? No. Every joy and sorrow had led them to this moment, sitting together on a warm summer evening, surrounded by family and love and the life they had built together. "No regrets," he said firmly. "Not a single one." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the mountains they both loved so much. Somewhere in the house, they could hear Thomas and Emma laughing with little Robert, the sounds of a new generation carrying on. "Tell me," Katherine said suddenly, "if you could go back to that day in the canyon, knowing everything that would happen after, would you still shoot the lock off that cage?" Tanner did not even have to think about it. "In a heartbeat. I would do it all again, every single moment, just to have you in my life." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. They had weathered storms together, faced down evil men, built a family and a legacy from nothing. They had loved and been loved in return, and what more could anyone ask for? As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Tanner thought back to the man he had been before Katherine, hollow and broken and barely surviving. That man was gone, replaced by someone who knew the value of each day, who cherished the woman beside him and the family they had created. He had found her caged in the back of a stolen wagon, shot the lock, and carried her home. That single act of mercy had changed both their lives forever, opening up a future neither of them could have imagined. And it had all started with a gunshot echoing across a canyon, and a cowboy who chose not to ride past. The years continued to unfold with gentle grace. Tanner and Katherine celebrated their 20th anniversary surrounded by family. Thomas and Emma's growing brood of children filling the ranch house with noise and laughter. Sarah had married a fellow teacher named David, and they lived in Colorado Springs with their twin daughters, visiting as often as their schedules allowed. The ranch had grown into one of the most successful operations in the region, employing a dozen hands and running over 1,000 head of cattle. But for all the expansion and prosperity, Tanner never forgot where it all began. He kept the old revolver he had used to shoot the lock off Katherine's cage in a place of honor above the fireplace, a reminder of the day their story started. On a crisp October morning in 1903, 20 years after that fateful day in the canyon, Tanner woke to find Katherine already up and dressed, standing at the window looking out at the autumn colors painting the landscape. "Come back to bed," he murmured, still half asleep. She turned to smile at him, and the love in her eyes took his breath away, just as it had every day for the past 2 decades. "It is our anniversary. I wanted to watch the sunrise." He got up and joined her at the window, wrapping his arms around her from behind. They stood together watching the sky lighten from deep purple to pink to gold, the world waking up around them. 20 years, Katherine said softly. "It feels like yesterday and forever at the same time. I know what you mean. Do you remember what you said to me that first night?" "After you brought me here, I said a lot of things. You said, 'I have got you. You are safe now,' and I believed you. Even though I barely knew you, even though I had every reason to be afraid, I believed you." Tanner tightened his arms around her. "And was I right? Have you been safe?" "Always. Not just physically safe, but safe in every way that matters. Safe to be myself, to love freely, to build a life without fear. You gave me that, Tanner. We gave it to each other. They spent the day celebrating quietly, just the two of them. Thomas had taken charge of the ranch work for the day, insisting his parents take time for themselves. They rode out to their favorite spot in the hills, a clearing with a view that stretched for miles, and had a picnic lunch of cold chicken and fresh bread and Katherine's apple pie. "I want to show you something," Katherine said after they had eaten. She reached into the basket and pulled out a leather-bound journal. "I have been writing down our story, everything from the day you found me until now. I want our grandchildren to know how we met, what we went through, how we built this life." Tanner took the journal, carefully turning the pages. Katherine's neat handwriting filled every page, chronicling their courtship, their marriage, the challenges they had faced and overcome. He read about the fire at the general store, about the night the outlaws attacked the ranch, about the births of their children and the quiet moments in between. "This is beautiful," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But you make me sound much more heroic than I was. You were my hero." "You are my hero. I am just telling the truth." They rode back to the ranch as the sun was setting and found the whole family waiting for them. Thomas and Emma had organized a surprise party, inviting friends from town and neighboring ranches. The house was decorated with fall flowers and ribbons, and someone had hired a fiddler to play music. They danced that night, Tanner and Katherine, moving together with the ease of two people who knew each other's rhythms perfectly. Around them, their children and grandchildren danced and laughed, the next generation carrying on the legacy of love and family that Tanner and Katherine had established. As the party wound down and the guests began to leave, Tanner found himself standing on the porch once more, Katherine beside him, watching their family say goodbyes and load up wagons. "We did all right, did we not?" Katherine said, taking his hand. "We did better than all right." "We did magnificently." She laughed, that bright sound that still made his heart skip a beat. "Always the charmer. Only with you." The seasons turned, bringing new challenges and new joys. There were hard years when the cattle prices fell and they had to tighten their belts. There were good years when the calves were plentiful and the grass grew high. Through it all, Tanner and Katherine faced everything side by side, their partnership as strong as ever. When Tanner turned 60, he finally agreed to let Thomas take over most of the day-to-day running of the ranch. It was not an easy transition, letting go of work that had defined him for so long, but Katherine kept him busy with other projects. They expanded the school, building a proper schoolhouse on their property where Katherine could teach. They started a lending library, filling it with books they ordered from Denver and the East Coast. Sarah and her family moved back to Manassas when her husband was offered a position as principal of the town school. Having their daughter close again filled both Tanner and Katherine with joy, and their granddaughters became regular visitors to the ranch, learning to ride and help with the animals just as their mother had done. The years accumulated like layers of sediment, each one adding to the foundation of the life they had built. Tanner's hair went fully white, and he needed reading glasses for the first time in his life. Katherine developed arthritis in her hands that made writing difficult, so she taught Tanner how to write down the stories she wanted to preserve, the two of them working together to document the history of their family. On a summer evening in 1913, 30 years after Tanner shot the lock off Katherine's cage, they sat on their porch surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The occasion was Thomas's 40th birthday, but it had turned into a celebration of family in general. Little Margaret, Thomas's youngest granddaughter at 4 years old, climbed into Tanner's lap. "Grandpa, tell the story again." "Which story, sweetheart?" "How you saved Grandma from the bad men." Tanner glanced at Katherine, who smiled encouragingly. He had told this story countless times over the years, but it never got old. Each telling was a reminder of where they had started and how far they had come. "Well," he began, settling Margaret more comfortably on his knee. "It was a hot summer day in July 1883, and I was tracking a stolen wagon through the canyon." The children listened with rapt attention, even though most of them had heard the tale before. Tanner told them about finding the cage, about shooting the lock, about bringing Katherine home. He told them about falling in love, about the challenges they faced, about building a life together. When he finished, Margaret looked up at him with wide eyes. "That is the best story ever." "It is not just a story," Katherine said gently. "It is our truth. And the moral of it is that sometimes the best things in life come from the hardest moments. Sometimes you have to go through darkness to find the light." "And sometimes," Tanner added, pulling Katherine close with his free arm, "you find exactly what you need when you least expect it." As the evening wore on and the family eventually dispersed to their various homes, Tanner and Katherine found themselves alone once more. They sat in their favorite rocking chairs, moving in synchronized rhythm, watching the stars emerge. "I am tired," Katherine admitted, "but it is a good tired. I know what you mean. Tanner, when our time comes, when we have to say goodbye to all this, you think we will have any regrets?" He considered the question seriously. They were both in their 70s now, their bodies showing the wear of hard lives and hard work. The future that had once stretched endlessly before them was now clearly finite. But when he looked back at the years they had shared, he could not find anything he would change. "No," he said firmly. "We loved well. We raised good children. We built something meaningful. What more could we ask for?" "Nothing," Katherine agreed. "Nothing at all." They sat in silence for a while, comfortable with each other in a way that only came from decades of partnership. Finally, Katherine spoke again. "You know what I think about sometimes? I think about those raiders who captured me. I think about Cyrus Brock and his men. And I wonder if they knew, when they put me in that cage, that they were actually putting me on a path to the greatest happiness of my life. I doubt they thought about it much at all. Probably not. But I like to imagine that somewhere in the grand design of things, even evil can be turned to good. They meant to destroy me, but instead they led me to you." Tanner reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand. Even after 30 years, touching her still sent a small thrill through him. "I am grateful every day that I decided to track that wagon. I almost did not, you know. I almost told old Mr. Patterson to let the sheriff handle it. What made you go? I do not know. Something just pulled me in that direction. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was God. Maybe it was just dumb luck. But I am glad I listened to whatever it was." The years after that continued with remarkable peace. They celebrated their 40th anniversary in 1923, an event that brought family from across Colorado and even a few relatives from Kansas, who still remembered Katherine's parents. The gathering was enormous, filling not just their ranch but spilling over into town, a testament to the life they had built and the love they had shared. Tanner was 80 years old now, his body bent with age but his mind still sharp. Katherine was 76, her hair completely white and her hands twisted with arthritis, but her spirit remained as vibrant as ever. They moved slower now, took longer to accomplish tasks that once would have been simple, but they moved together, always together. On a quiet morning in late September, as the autumn colors were just beginning to show, Tanner woke to find Katherine still sleeping beside him. This was unusual. She was normally the early riser, up before dawn to watch the sunrise. He started to wake her, then noticed how peaceful she looked and decided to let her rest. He got up carefully, dressed, and went outside to tend to the few simple chores he still insisted on doing himself. When he returned an hour later, Katherine still had not stirred. Concerned now, he sat on the edge of the bed and touched her shoulder. "Katherine, time to wake up, love." She did not respond. With growing dread, Tanner checked for a pulse and found it weak and thready. He shouted for Thomas, who was already up and working in the barn, and within minutes they had sent for the doctor. Doc Morrison had retired years ago, but his son had taken over the practice. Young doctor. Morrison examined Katherine thoroughly while Tanner paced outside the bedroom, his heart in his throat. When the doctor emerged, his expression was kind but grave. "Her heart is failing. I am sorry, Mr. Yates. There is nothing I can do except make her comfortable." The words hit Tanner like a physical blow. "How long?" "Days. Maybe a week if she is strong." The family gathered. Sarah came immediately from town, and messengers were sent to grandchildren and great-grandchildren who lived farther away. The house filled with quiet voices, and the smell of cooking as the women prepared meals and the men stood in awkward clusters, not knowing what to do. Katherine woke that afternoon, confused by all the fuss. When Tanner explained what the doctor had said, she simply nodded. "I wondered," she said softly. "I have been so tired lately." "You are going to be fine," Tanner said fiercely. "You are the strongest person I know." She smiled and touched his cheek. "Tanner, my love, we both know that is not true. My time is coming and I am ready." "Well, I am not ready. I need you. You will be all right. You have Thomas and Sarah and all those grandchildren and great-grandchildren. You have a full life ahead of you. I do not want a life without you in it." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "We have had 40 wonderful years. That is more than most people get. I am grateful for every single day." Over the next 3 days, Katherine drifted in and out of consciousness. During her lucid moments, she talked with each of her children and many of her grandchildren, offering words of wisdom and love. She made Tanner promise to keep the school running, to continue the lending library, to make sure the family stayed close. On the 4th day, as the sun was setting, Katherine opened her eyes and looked directly at Tanner, who had not left her side except for brief necessities. "Do you remember," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "that first night, when you said you had got me and I was safe?" "I remember. I want you to know that you kept that promise. I have been safe with you every day since. Safe and loved and cherished. Thank you for that." "Katherine, please, do not say goodbye. I have to. But Tanner, this is not the end. It is just the next chapter. We will find each other again, I promise." "How can you be so sure?" "Because some loves are too strong to be contained by just one lifetime. Ours is one of those loves." She closed her eyes, and Tanner felt her hand go slack in his. For a moment he thought she was gone, but then she drew another breath, and another. She lingered through the night, her breathing growing more labored, and just as the sun was rising on a beautiful September morning, Katherine Ashford Yates took her last breath. Tanner sat holding her hand long after she was gone, unable to let go, unable to accept that the woman who had been the center of his world for 40 years was truly gone. Finally, Thomas came in and gently pried his father's fingers from his mother's hand. "Let her go, Pa," Thomas said softly. "She is at peace now." They buried Katherine on a hill overlooking the ranch, next to the spot they had chosen years ago for their final resting place. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, testament to how many lives she had touched as a teacher, a neighbor, a friend. Tanner stood at the graveside listening to Reverend Mills speak about eternal life and God's mercy, but the words barely registered. All he could think about was that he would never see her smile again, never hear her laugh, never hold her hand and watch the sunset. The weeks after Katherine's death were the darkest of Tanner's life, darker even than when he lost Martha, because this time he was older and more tired and less sure he could survive the grief. He went through the motions of living because his children needed him to, but inside he felt hollow. One evening about a month after the funeral, Tanner sat on the porch alone, rocking in his chair out of habit more than comfort. Sarah came out and sat in the chair that had been her mother's, the chair that Tanner had not been able to bring himself to sit in since Katherine died. "You need to eat, Pa. You are wasting away. I am not hungry. Ma would not want this. You know she would not. Your mother was always wiser than me." They sat in silence for a while, then Sarah spoke again. "Tell me the story about how you found her. You have heard it 1,000 times. Tell me again." So Tanner told it, finding himself speaking more to the memory of Katherine than to his daughter. He told about the gunshot that broke the lock, about carrying her home, about falling in love. As he spoke, he felt some of the tightness in his chest ease. This story was his connection to her, the thread that bound their lives together. When he finished, Sarah was crying quietly. "That is a beautiful love story, Pa, one for the ages. It was my life, our life. And it is not over just because she is gone. You still have the memories. You still have the family you built together. That is her legacy, and it is yours too." Tanner realized his daughter was right. Katherine lived on in their children and grandchildren, in the school she had founded, in the library she had built, in the countless lives she had touched. Death had taken her body, but not her influence, not the love she had spread through the world. Slowly, Tanner began to rejoin the world of the living. He ate meals with Thomas and his family. He visited with his grandchildren and great-grandchildren. He even went back to the school and read to the students, something Katherine had always loved to do. He lived for 5 more years after Katherine's death. Years filled with quiet contentment, if not the joy he had known with her by his side. He saw 2 more great-grandchildren born, bringing the total to an even dozen. He celebrated his 85th birthday surrounded by family, and when asked what he wanted as a gift, he said only, "To know that you all love each other the way your grandmother and I loved each other." On a warm July morning in 1928, exactly 45 years after he found Katherine in that canyon, Tanner Yates died peacefully in his sleep. They found him in his bed with a smile on his face, his hand reaching across the empty space where Katherine used to sleep. They buried him next to Katherine on the hill overlooking the ranch, and the whole town turned out to say goodbye to a man who had been a pillar of their community for over 4 decades. Thomas gave the eulogy, speaking about his father's courage, his integrity, his unwavering love for his family. But it was Sarah who spoke the words that everyone remembered. "My father once told me that he almost did not track that wagon. He almost let someone else handle it. But something made him go, and that something led him to my mother." Their love story began with a gunshot breaking a lock, and it ended only when death itself could no longer keep them apart. They are together now, watching over all of us, and their love continues in every one of us gathered here today. We are all children of the day Tanner Yates shot the lock and carried Katherine Ashford home. We are all living proof that love can triumph over darkness, that hope can survive despair, that 2 broken people can build something beautiful together. That is their legacy. That is what they gave us. The family prospered in the years that followed. Thomas ran the ranch until he was too old to continue, then passed it on to his own son. The school expanded into a full academy that educated children from all over the county. The library became a treasured community resource. And the story of Tanner and Katherine became legend, told and retold to each new generation as a reminder of what true love looked like. The revolver that broke the lock stayed above the fireplace for generations, a tangible link to the day everything began. And on warm summer evenings, if you visited the ranch and stood very still, old-timers would swear you could sometimes see two figures sitting on the porch, rocking in perfect rhythm, watching the sunset together the way they had for 40 years. It was a love story written in the harsh landscape of the Wild West, forged in fire and violence but sustained by tenderness and commitment. It was the story of a cowboy who chose to look into a canyon instead of riding past, who saw a woman caged and chose to set her free. It was the story of a woman who survived unimaginable trauma and chose to trust again, to love again, to build a life again. Most of all, it was a story of hope. Hope that even in the darkest moments, rescue might be just around the corner. Hope that love could heal the deepest wounds. Hope that two people who had every reason to give up on happiness could find it in each other's arms. They found her caged in the back of a stolen wagon. The cowboy shot the lock and carried her home. And from that single act of mercy grew a love that outlasted lifetimes, touching hundreds of lives and leaving a legacy that would endure for generations to come. It was, in every sense of the word, a story worth telling, a life worth living, a love worth celebrating. And in the end, that was all that mattered.